right. Hello, guys. We're so honored to have our second guest on our podcast. His name is Lou, and he sits out of Austin, Texas, where I am right now. And then we also have Moon in California.
Very welcome, Lou. It's a pleasure to have you here, and you're our second guest, and very, very happy that you can join us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to it since Coco proposed this to me.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, or I don't know, anything about your awakening journey? I know you have a lot
Yeah,
to talk about always, so whatever it is that wants to come through.
yeah. Like I was thinking about like how to introduce myself earlier, and like none of it all kind of sounded like very like fluffy, and I was like, no, that's not it. And then I remember, well, like just reflecting back on everything that I've experienced, like since I was a kid, leading into like this moment, I was like, I'm probably really weird, but what my like the healer that I've been working with and mentor told me about that was that like the etymology of the word weird comes like from a really cool place. It comes from like one of the three Norns in Norse mythology, right? Which basically Urd, which basically means fate. And then like around the year 1400, the word ended up like the definition for it ended up changing to one who controls his own fate, his or her own fate. And so like me looking at the trajectory like from my childhood and then how things like I perceived that at the time turned it into something kind of dark and into the worst. All this time I've been pretty much weaving my own faith and fate, and I don't know. I think that made sense, so I'm sticking to that.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because I think today or yesterday I made a post on my own Instagram where I think Mark Twain was saying how important it is to be oneself, and how the truth actually is so much weirder and so much stranger than fiction, so we have these like ways of the of society and the way how we're raised up to give us a sense of who we are and who we're supposed to be and our personality that we end up adopting as children.
Right.
But the more we distance ourselves from that and start focusing on the core, on the seed that's within us, the more the weirdness comes in, and the less we feel like we're accepted or being received. But the more we
Yeah.
dedicate ourselves to that, the weirdness comes out and the uniqueness comes through, and that's when the magic starts happening. So we're really happy that you're doing it.
Yeah,
We're on the same
100%.
journey.
Yeah, I mean, and just to add a little bit to that, like I think ever since I was a kid, like I've always felt like I was like not like normal, like I was already like the outcast, right? And that kind of like led me to not trust into like things that everybody was into. For instance, like I was always looking into different topics, things that nobody even dared to touch. And even when it came to like my own, when I started like down this path, like the spiritual path, and especially through my own healing journey, that's basically the same route that I went to. Like at the beginning, therapy, I guess, was the thing that was recommended to me, and I was like, something felt off. And I think what felt off for me was that it was missing like the spiritual component. And so like I started looking into my own, I started looking at psychology on my own, and that kind of led me into topics that were less known, especially here in the States, but that basically started making all of the difference to me as I was navigating through some like really dark times.
Mhm. What were some of the topics that would show up for you, like in the very beginning? What made you like, oh, there's something more?
Yeah, so I think on my own, I started looking into Jung, for instance. It's particularly like the whole concept of anima and animus, because that was it's very like it's prevalent in the stuff that I'm trying to address. And it kind of gave me some of the things that I was looking for, but it was just barely like scratching the surface, right? And then it kind of led me into the work of Alejandro Jodorowsky, who you might know is the director of The
I
Holy
love him
Mountain,
so much.
one of
Oh
my
my God.
favorite movies. One of the few movies that I watch because I don't watch anything. um,
Good.
but I mean, not only is he like a genius, like filmmaker and director and whatnot, but after he kind of took like a hiatus from working in the industry, and he started looking into like all these like healing modalities, and so like all of it was basically kind of inspired by the tarot, particular deck that he used, which is a Marcel deck. And all of that, it's the symbolism in that deck. I mean, he's an expert at it, right? But also, he started looking into all sorts of different teachers and whatnot, and he ended up developing a system, I guess, yeah, called genealogy, which deals more with the study of the family tree and how your ancestors end up, how their unresolved conflicts in their lifetime end up impacting you. So it's basically, he was basically taking this ancient wisdom, I guess, of like ancestral worship and all of that, and relaying it in a modern way so that people could understand that there are some issues that, yeah, I mean, you can talk about, like, you can bring up epigenetics, for instance, right? It's basically explaining the same thing but through scientific means, whereas with this, I think it's a little bit more tangible to the common like person nowadays, because you don't have to explain epigenetics. You can just explain, hey, like, there are specific mechanisms that exist that can tell you whether or not you're actually inheriting something from a particular ancestor. And that's relevant because if you can pinpoint which ancestor that is coming from, or at least just kind of like estimate who it might have been, it gives you clues as to how you can resolve it yourself. And so along with that methodology also comes another one that he created called psychomagic, which is basically taking, yeah, the like in ritualistic magic, for instance, you'll have people dress up with different regalia, like donning like either daggers or different instruments or whatnot. And like the aim for that is to basically draw something from the subconscious mind, because the subconscious mind interprets everything as a symbol, right? Even our external reality as a symbol. And so he took that concept and basically kind of tailor-made, like if you were someone to go into a consultation with him or something, and you tell him your problems, he will like tailor-made something like an act, some sort of performative act that you have to do that will basically dissipate the entire energy around whatever blockage, limitation, whatever issue that you're facing, and so that it completely goes away. But it has to be like this thing that your subconscious mind believes in. And part of that is just like performing different acts, which are like when you hear it, it's completely ridiculous, and some of it is like you really have to be like at the end of your rope basically to do them, because they can be very exaggerated and extreme in some point, in some aspects, but it resolves those problems. So no, that's I ended up going even further down the rabbit hole than that, but that's kind of like the gist of it. I can
Super
definitely keep talking
interesting.
about this if you want.
Yeah, no, I read Psychomagic, the book, and I was mind blown how much Hodorowski is tapped into the subconscious mind and tapped
He's
into the
amazing.
meta worlds and tapped into the astral worlds, and his understanding how to bridge this quantum architecture that's in there, that's connecting all the subconscious minds of the people around him as
Yeah.
well as the collective, and draw it into the symbolism that he then puts into art. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, it
Right.
was so mind blown because there's so many topics in that movie, Holy Mountain, that I was already interested in at a young age. But it was
Mm.
this, that. But when you watch the movie, it's like, of course, it all makes sense.
I
It like
know there's
resonates on
so
so
much
many
that goes on
levels.
in your head, right? Yeah, when you're watching
Yeah.
that movie. Um, I guess another thing that I would say along those lines is that, he was like a fundamental figure. And another kind of like discipline that came after him. So like people took what he discovered about the family tree and whatnot, and also the performative acts, and they created like an entirely different like healing modality based on that was also simplified a little bit further.
What's the
And
name
it
of this healing modality?
it's called biodecoding. It's not known that much here in the States.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty popular in Spain,
Mm-hmm.
in France, and also in Latin America, which, like, oh, I was gonna say about Jodorowsky too, is that there's a bunch of videos on YouTube of him. He used to go around and do these like he would sell out arenas, like thousands of people would show up to see him like basically
Perform psychomagic.
perform psychomagic, interpret what somebody was going through and then create these acts using people from the audience and see
Mm-hmm.
how they work. And like, if you're unfortunately not all of them are include subtitles, but some do. And just
Mm-hmm.
watching them, like, stuff starts going off in your head that it might not be entirely tied to like a particular issue that you're trying to address, but there's enough there sometimes that will get the wheels turning and will start making you look at particular situations from a different perspective,
Perspective.
enough to where it can start to shift the energy around that, and you can start make progress around your own healing and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
What
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. What I find really interesting is the connection that he makes with this performance art stuff, right?
Right.
Because performance
Mhm.
art includes the body, and the body is where the subconscious mind actually is, or like where it's a conduit to the subconscious mind, let's put it that way.
Right.
That's where the hidden emotions and hidden trapped traumas and hidden blockages are. And he's
Exactly.
using the body by embodying certain situations or like having
Hmm.
to do things with the body to be able to unlock it. But in reality, it's just like it's almost like a surreal connection to like a quantum issue that you can only solve with magic, but
Right.
involving this embodied psychomagic artwork,
Hmm.
and it includes it's almost like how's it called, this performance art thing? Like where you're involved in it. It's like theater. It's immersive theater.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. So here's the neat thing. So with this like biodecoding like practice modality, whatever you want to call it, it's a really vast subject, but what it has done, it's basically you can still perform, those acts, and that will help. I guess what people have done in biodecoding is they've taken Jodorowsky's concepts, especially about the family tree, and they've like performed all sorts of research with them to the point where um, they were able to define, like, just as like syndromes, for instance, show up in some medical literature. They can also be applied to the psyche and to phenomena that are tied to your ancestors. And they've even further developed the mechanisms to pinpoint like which ancestor might be impacting you and whatnot, to the point where if you're sitting down with a person that I guess is a biodecoder, they're able to they're able to show you how, like, the logic of how a particular like energies, I guess, for lack of a better word, how they're playing in from your point, from the stuff that you're experiencing. So like you would go and relay your experience with someone, and then you would start to like basically go through the motions of, you go back to your childhood, pinpoint the first experience that you had with that, But then, some of these issues might be so deep that you have to go back to the time that you were in the womb, in your mother's womb, and see what the conditions were like throughout the entire period, and also 9 months prior to it, because that time also like has it imprints you before you even conceive, right? And if there might be hints there, if the issue is particularly deep, then you start going back and you start, trying to try to discover who it might have been that might have had a similar issue that the one that you're facing. And so once you're kind of like discovering that, the discovery itself, like just bringing awareness to it, like completely breaks out of you. And like I've actually seen this done because at one point, like my dad basically did that to cure his cancer. And like like as soon as what ends up happening is like you end up pinpointing where the issue is like came from, like its origin, like without a doubt. Then you have like this intense emotional release after that happens, and that is what causes like all the energy to dissipate around it. And so like that's kind of like what I've been doing with myself. I haven't had the chance of actually to work with someone, but in the entire process that I've been doing this, it's like I've experienced some things that I don't think have been documented in the biodecoding space, that at least have given me like a way bigger perspective into like my own family's history, for instance, and what intense trauma exists there. Like I don't think had I worked with someone earlier on, I would probably like fix my issue or whatever, but I would have not dissipated the energy that is affecting like my own family collective. And so that's kind of like where I see myself in this particular like work that I'm doing, in that like I've always been someone that has not been afraid of looking at really or like yeah, really looking at dark things. I wouldn't say that I'm comfortable doing it, but for lack of a better way of saying it, I have the stomach for it, and I can accept the things that I see without being too judgmental about it. And so
You're a shadow worker.
right, yeah. In my particular like family, it's kind of like, so usually the way that it sometimes works is that somebody in the family is assigned the role of a black sheep, right? And it's not because they're weird or whatever. That's just surface level stuff. It's because collectively, if you want to think of it at the soul level, collectively, there's all these energies in the family tree that represent unresolved trauma, unresolved conflicts, things that have not been addressed. But along the way comes a soul that those other souls perceive as being, I guess, strong enough, if you want to put it that way, to be able to kind of address these issues. And so, like in my particular family, like my younger brother was kind of like the black sheep, just because he was kind of like the rebel at first. He was always the one that was against my dad and whatever. Even though I wanted to do it, like I was a little bit smarter and decided that he could do it for me, right? But anyway, but that the roles ended up changing over time, especially like for instance after he got married and he settled down, like he was not in that rebellious phase at all. And then here I was like looking into like all of these like darker aspects of like the psyche and my own psyche, and also like the collective one. And all of a sudden, like that's when like things kind of shifted for me. Like I even like that was basically the point where like I started to wear all black and get piercings and all this stuff, right? And so it's kind of like at some point someone might even tag out, and there might be this transference that occurs, even though I would also say that I was probably like that in the beginning as well, just because I was always very like tapped into the spiritual like side of things. And I was already, even from an early age, experiencing like darker, like paranormal stuff. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting. I don't know where I was leading with that, but yeah.
Interesting. So you kind of tapped into eighth house and energy at
Yeah.
some point, right? Like it was all about death and transformation and going into the shadows and kind of uncovering all these hidden aspects of yourself and your family. It's interesting because the
Mhm.
things that you're talking about is very much parallel to the work Coco and I are doing with the
Mhm.
hypnosis work, because
Right.
Right,
with
I was
our
gonna
work
point that
also, yeah.
out. No, go continue, but I was saying that.
Yeah, it's we tap into the subconscious mind through the body, through either
Mhm.
relaxing or moving the body, and find the trauma where we first experienced it. But then you can always trace it back further and further. You can trace
Right.
it into the genealogy as
Mhm.
well as the previous lifetimes, you know, and somehow
Oh,
this
exactly. Totally.
interesting universe. I like the word architecture these days. It's really strange.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what it is, right? Like our genetic karma and our personal karma and our past life karma and our mission from our higher selves, they're all somehow interrelated with each other. And it's all just kind of ripples working together. And these ripples somehow make us physical almost, you know? And
Mhm.
then as we're like experiencing or exploring our physical structure from like a quantum perspective, it's like, okay, so there's energy coming, there's an emotion coming up, I'm getting triggered and I'm experiencing this and that, whatever we perceive, we can pinpoint in our physical
Mhm.
body an emotion or a trauma, and then we can go dive deeper and see where it's coming from. And I think it's important to kind of see things holistically, right? Being
Oh,
able
exactly.
to
Yeah.
go into the personal one, the generational one, the collective one. And I think that's the only way we can chip away at this major thing that is there in the collective sense, right? Because we're all
Totally.
not only doing healing work for ourselves, we're doing it for
Mhm.
the collective. And the more, I don't know, courage we have, and the more tools we have, and the more people we have that we can talk about this and exchange information and tools with, the better we can do this work. And it's definitely not easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were
Yeah,
you
no,
gonna say something, Coco?
you're summing up exactly what I was saying because it's interesting because that's exactly what we're doing. But how do you track it down yourself? Because you said you're not
Mm.
working with a person or a what was it? You named them something. And then if
Yeah.
you're not using hypnosis, like what technique do you use in order to track that down?
Yeah, so it gets really interesting. So I first started to study like this like different conditions or like syndromes that I was talking about. And usually, there's a bunch of videos on YouTube, like usually from practitioners in Spain that are explaining like these things. And so like as I was going through and listening to those things, I started to like, ask my parents, like, hey, like I think, this aligns with, how I am, whatever. Can you tell me what your experiences were like? And in that beginning stage, you have to kind of do a little bit of research into your family tree. Um, if it's, the issue requires you to do it right, because it's not all the time are you going to be dealing with generational things. So the first step was just kind of like learning about these concepts, and also learning about how they show up in our bodies. And so one of the ways, like I had mentioned before, that the subconscious speaks to us is symbolically. Well, I would say our bodies and our external reality. And so there's a direct correlation between like really deep emotional states and things like illnesses, or organs that are impacted in the body that end up showing up, or also just different things in your reality that start to like break down, like appliances, or like just different experiences that you run into that are just odd and are meant to be kind of like these like signals for you to kind of like take pause and reflect on what they're showing you. And so with the body, it's really simple, because there are like dictionaries that exist that tell you, hey, like if you're, you know, dealing with an issue with your bladder, for instance, there's a direct emotion that you can tie it back to. And so like when I'm referencing these dictionaries, they kind of just tell you just in general terms what the emotion like that you're dealing, like what the emotional cause of it is. And so from there, it's kind of like your job to look back and reflect on, you know, a particular situation that might have occurred that might have triggered a specific issue in your body, right? So that's one thing that's like really easy to pinpoint. And it starts getting a little bit harder when, say that you're really healthy and like things don't, like your body all of a sudden is kind of like brushing those off. I think what ends up happening, this is another thing that I've experienced, but I don't think it's in any of the literature itself. It's just my hypothesis. What ends up, well, actually this part is in the literature. So if you were someone to have pets or kids, for instance, what ends up happening is that if you're healthy, the issues end up being transferred to either a kid or a pet. That occurs because at the individual level, you can, you know, you're just looking at the organism, right? So the subconscious mind, in a way, is the only thing that it cares about is your survival. If you want to tie it into like spiritual terms, you're dealing with the etheric body, and the etheric body is just dealing with that as well. You're dealing with pure like things that keep you in motion, that keep you living in this physical reality. And so like the whole thing about different emotions triggering different things in different organs, that's where that kind of comes from. Like there's the brain or the mind interprets things differently. And so like, but it's usually it gets triggered in the same way. So like anybody that has like issues with their knees, for instance, it's always going to be the same thing usually. And so with so you have that at the individual level, you're just dealing with basic survival. At the collective, like family level, for instance, you have the same thing. So in order to thrive, in order to survive, someone has to kind of like, there's like this like collective, you can think of it as a collective mind that basically says, okay, well, Lou is healthy, but he's going through this rough time. His body's not gonna like reflect that, so the energy has to go somewhere. His dog, I don't have a dog, but if I did, his dog, for instance, is also healthy, but it can take on the energy. And so the stuff that I'm dealing with will end up be impacting my dog or my pet. And then that will be like a signal for me to look at what my pet is facing, and for me to reflect in the same way. If and then same thing with kids, for instance, maybe not in that drastic of a way, but it does happen. A particular case, for instance, is like autism, and that usually happens, for instance, when there's like a really deep family secret that generationally has not been passed down, or if the mother, for instance, wants to do something that she does not want to reveal, it ends up manifesting as autism, like as, you know, this kid that's unable to speak. They're unable to speak for a reason. So that's kind of like like how you can tie the biological sense behind a particular illness or issue, right? And so then if you're dealing with something really deep that you know, you go back through all those things and you feel like it's not yours, then you can start to tap into the collective, your family tree collective. And the same thing applies there. The energy does not go away. Somebody has to basically take this on and resolve it. And you know, that's when you get like different patterns showing up in your life. And the fact that they're showing up, those are, again, the same thing. They're signals for you to pause, reflect, and
Investigate.
investigate and take action in order to heal. So all this though is, you can kind of see why you need like a biodecoder, like a practitioner to kind of do this for you. However, I would say that I think everybody should be able to at least get just some of the standard ways of looking at things to like just learn how to do this. Because once you are able to learn to look at like the symbolism in your everyday situations, and you can start to walk through life in a more confident manner. Like as soon as I started to learn about this, it basically revealed to me like the real nature of disease, the real nature of illness. And it's not like this, like it comes from this external like pathogen, and all of a sudden like I have to be fearing germs or anything like that. No, it's like the
It's
cause
all just
origin.
manifestations,
Right.
right? What I find really interesting in everything that you said, that like common thread is the importance of symbolism, right? And that's kind of like how Hodorowski ties it together, because I'm also really into tarot, and I saw him read
Oh
for
yeah.
people. My mind was blown the way how
Mhm.
he draws certain things together, but it makes so much sense. But like a normal person would never make this connection, that's
Right.
just kind of going super deep into it. But what I always say is that in our day-to-day life, like, oh, not even just day-to-day life, like spirit wants to communicate with us, right? Like we came from somewhere, but as we're like descending and falling onto the earth, like growing in density, we forget, we get amnesia,
Right.
and we have to figure out a way to remember and awaken and awaken and awaken and stay present enough to figure out what's happening around us, right? And spirit is like, okay, how do I send messages? Our spirit guides and our helpers and our ancestors, everyone is like, you can do this, figure this out.
Right.
And there's all these different interfaces to do it. And I think the body is an amazing one, as you're saying, like it's sending us messages through
Right.
ailments, and through emotions and through feelings and intuitions and stuff like that, but also through tarot, like there's all these different systems, or even just reading geomancy. There's so many different ways
Yeah,
that all these cultures have created of communicating with spirit in a way that it gives us guidance to navigate the space, because we're here to resolve those things that the previous generations haven't figured out, or take on the things that the world and the different energies are throwing at us at this point. It's like it's
totally.
really important to be aware of the fact that it's happening, knowing that there's messages, there's symbolisms going on, knowing that there's more, far more than the things that we see and that we are used to every day, and then tune into it and figuring out ways to exist on a multidimensional level.
Oh, I mean, 100%. I
Like the
think
game,
one,
It's like you're just
right,
trying to
yeah,
get out and like try to find in like our hints are like the body, the reality. It's like throwing things and like, okay, that's a boost. I gotta go this way, right? So
Yeah, it's a feedback loop, a
it's
giant feedback loop.
exactly.
yeah. It's wild because ultimately, what biodecoding made me discover is the whole like I always like I got into yoga several years ago, and I tried to read the ancient text, and I got the gist of it, but I would say that not only with Vedic text, or even, I mean, I tried to get into like occult magic back in the day, and like try to read like grimoires and stuff like that. And I think one of the things that people don't they don't make this connection is that we weren't us humans, we're not always like this physical, right? And so some of the things from those tags, it sounds a little bit convoluted because humanity was like physically like in a different density. We hadn't like descended all the way to the point that we are at right now. But um what I was gonna say is that with biodecoding is basically like bringing all of that ancient wisdom in a way that's palpable for like modern times, right? And that's kind of like how that was kind of like the aim of some of the mystery schools back at the turn of the last century. they were trying to basically divulge information to make it understandable, and for people living in modern society to basically pick up modern, like to pick up spirituality and practice it every day without having to become a recluse and go into the forest somewhere, or find a cave and completely
Secluded.
repel society and become a hermit and do the spiritual work that way. What they were saying is, hey, like, you can be spiritual all the time, but only if you kind of like know how to navigate your way around it, right? And so like, like Gurdjieff's work did a good way of doing that, and also like anthroposophy did a good way. But also, like, I think there's still somewhat of a high barrier to entry for a lot of people, like, that are wanting to practice these things. Whereas I was lucky enough to have found this, and it eventually led me to discover Advaita. And it the way that biodecoding explains it, it's well, it's not really biodecoding, but like biodecoding is like this huge like umbrella term, right? But one of the practices that falls under it, from one of the guys that I follow, he makes everything so simple that you can, like, anytime that I'm facing a particular issue, like, the way that I try to resolve it, yeah, there's like all these concepts that I talked about that other people have discovered and things like that. But ultimately, if you can look at things from this perspective of unity consciousness, then you don't really need to know, like, you don't need to be like well versed in all these other things. You can tap into, um, you can say like your higher self or whatnot, because I feel like that's what I tap into whenever I'm facing like I'm having like a really like I'm in the depths of like a really like deep like emotional thing that I'm going through, and I don't know where it comes from. I can say like, hold up, like like the other person or this other thing is not at fault here. Like, if anything, everything that I'm experiencing is a mirror. Everything external to me, or even like, yeah, everything, like even my body, everything is a mirror, and it's trying to tell me something. It's trying to tell it to me symbolically, but ultimately, if I can tap into that awareness that, I am also it, I'm also that person, that other person is just me, like telling myself an aspect of myself that I'm not like seeing, then it like it does. I mean, I can't even like explain like the wonders that it does in terms of how you can approach just life in general, because all of a sudden, like, you don't like, this concept of fear goes away in a way.
It gives
And
you a sense of wholeness, right?
right,
Because you don't feel fragmented, you don't feel disconnected and isolated in that sense. You
right.
just see the
Mm-hmm.
universe as the universe, and you're reflecting yourself in everything that you're experiencing, and you have the power to change it yourself. You can change your
Exactly.
perspective, you can change and heal those different aspects of yourself that you're projecting onto the others, and all
Mm-hmm.
these kind of things. Because if you think other people are at fault in any kind of situation, then it's you giving away your power, and then you have to live in fear
Exactly.
because you can't control it. But in reality, it's us. Everything that we're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing in this hologram, we're projecting from the inside outward, and we're like, okay, bring it back to me, feedback loop, until I
Right.
overcome it and
Mm-hmm.
are able to go to the next level. It's just really important, I feel like, right now in general, like with the collective sense, that we
Yeah.
all start to tap into these kind of things and do these thoughts and into these ideas. Because going back to our lineage, going back to different spiritual practices, all these things, it's available to us more than ever. We're all kind of awakening these neo-shamanic traditions
Mm-hmm.
and abilities within ourselves, as well as having access to the knowledge to be able to do something with it. Because as you're saying before, we were so like normal people were disconnected from it unless you were an adept and you were sworn to secrecy and you're never able to talk
Right.
about it. And you know, and it's all happening in the darkness. We have to bring it to the light to be able to do it collectively, because shit's about to hit the fan, guys.
I know,
I think
totally.
it all goes down to like self-empowerment too, right? Because we've been over time, we've been learned to like rely on something else. Like Jesus is not, like not knocking down any like religions, but Jesus is gonna save you, or
Right.
like Muhammad's gonna save you, and it's like outsourcing our power. But like I was actually thinking through all of this conversation that we've had, like how can people tap into these things by themselves, like without like a
Yeah.
person who's gonna hypnotize them or a person who's gonna geocode them. But and then you like summarize it really well. It's like it all goes down to like self-reflection. But
Hmm.
the hard part, it's like it's slowing down the turmoil that's going in your head, right? Like the everyday like busy mind that's like judging you and
Right.
telling this and that. And it's like truly tapping into that higher self wisdom, which is unity consciousness, which we're all attached to, right? So that's the part where it's tough, but it's definitely doable. And I think the more we practice it and the more we slow down our brain, we can truly tap into it, and believing, or and starts with us believing that we are in charge of our reality, right? That
Right.
we are empowered ourselves. So huge on what you guys are saying.
Totally.
Yeah,
And I think
I
also,
also think, sorry, I just
go
got
ahead.
super activated. Just a small little thing. I think it's really about the brain waves, right? Like again, back to the body and
Hmm.
being able to shift our brain waves, that we tap into theta and delta brain waves to
Yep.
be able to connect. You know, there's different ways for a conscious mind of knowing, okay, my body's feeling this way, that way, I'm having symptoms. The conscious mind can interact with it. But to really get in touch with our higher selves and to our guidance, we need to change our brain waves. We need to learn how to meditate
Yeah.
and modulate our energy frequency to be able to tap into information. And I think that's kind of the where it is, right? Because once we go in there, there are so many
Hmm.
different tools on how to navigate it and retrieve information. But how do we get in there?
But it's like as simple as like, and like I mean not as simple, as much sharper than that, but like for as advice for people who are watching, like you can literally turn on some frequency, like theta brainwave
Hmm.
frequency, slowing it down, doing yoga nidra, which Moon introduced me to. That's been like
Yeah.
helpful. Movement, some movements, the meditations are so great too, breath work, all this stuff. And then like you can truly start having your own revelations through these modalities, and you don't even need anyone else to help you, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And I think that's I'm glad that y'all are touching on like the work that y'all are doing is so important, especially with hypnosis, because I think that's one of the things that I mean, I just ran into that when I was younger, and I taught myself how to. I had this book that went through and taught you how to hypnotize yourself, and that's something that I've always been able to tap into. But also, like you were saying, Coco, about being able to tap into the body, that is huge, I feel, because there's a reason why all of these ancient like occult practices always had like movement assigned to them. So you had, the Sufis, they had like this whole like temple dance thing that they did.
Learning.
Yeah, Rudolf Steiner created eurythmy, for instance, as well. And then, all sorts of like ancient temple cultures always had some sort of modality that tapped into the body.
Even
Um,
Gurdjieff had one, right? With these.
right, yeah. Gorgeous thing, yeah. And I can say like for me, like like being able to tap into my body in that way, like has all like it's been huge because not only like does it promote health and everything like that. I mean, if you're not healthy, it's kind of difficult to be able to do a lot of this work by yourself. But not only does it do that, but it brings awareness to a very like deep part of yourself, because like as John were mentioning, like all these energies and traumas, they end up getting stuck in the body. And so the more that you're able to draw an awareness to your body, I think the more that you're able to tap into the spiritual side of things, a lot more easier. I know that that's been the case for me, and just me reflecting on the fact that it's you don't often hear about people that are like into bodybuilding and that are like that compete, especially, and that are tapped into like this spiritual side of things. Like you barely hear about it, but the experiences that I've had, and just being able to navigate through some like really dark stuff, like that's where the benefit of having a physical practice comes in. You will like, it gives you so much, like I can't even like do it justice, but it gives you so much in a way that you're able to navigate through anything basically. It's not gonna be easy, but it makes you resilient, and it makes you have this confidence that yes, you'll get through it, no matter what. So
Yeah, I think it's also really important to remember that our spines are like antennas, right? And our muscles or like our
mhm,
fascia are like crystalline storage systems for information. So even let's say, okay, we want to heal a certain illness, we move, we get into flow state, we get into like
mhm,
a higher frequency to be able to understand what's happening and make differences and stuff. But then on the other hand, it's like it's this amazing tool for us to time travel and jump into different kind of dimensions because it's a
mhm,
technology, right? Like we only see the physical body, but our chakras are like interface systems with different dimensions. You know what I mean? And the different parts of our bodies hold so much wisdom. And when we learn how to trust our bodies, when you learn how to listen to our bodies and our intuition, all the messages that are coming through, then we can navigate this space in a whole new way. We can navigate brainwave frequencies through different kind of movements and getting into
mhm.
trance. This is all neo shamanism, you know, where like
Right, yeah.
humming and dancing and moving and shaking, that's what gets us tuned into different kind of places. And I think
Mhm,
forgetting about the body and just sitting and meditating, for especially for people like with who have ADHD like myself, gets
mhm.
boring.
No, I mean that's something also that I recently ran into, that Rudolf Steiner was talking about how because of the density that we're in right now, it's almost as though our physical bodies have been more perfected than our etheric and astral bodies. And so like the physical body is the first thing that you need to tap into. Without not like if you're not able to tap into that, it's gonna be a lot harder to either you can still tap into obviously like the astral body, but for instance, you're not gonna be well grounded. And so you're susceptible to all sorts of other things if that happens, right? So yeah, I just thought that was interesting. I was gonna say something else, but I'll lost my train of thought. I'll come back to it.
No,
But
and it
yeah.
all goes down to like merging the physical body with the astral body. And it's like, and
Hmm.
I think to me, that's what 5D is like.
Hmm.
Like that, it's literally realizing the power in our physical body and now seeing the quantum part of us, the astral body, and bridging it into the body. And now we're superhuman. Now we got both to play with because like most people who are just existing in a three-dimensional reality, they're like they completely don't understand intuition, like gut feeling, you know, and knowing that energy is look, some people are under like, oh, they see what energy means, but not to the point where they're starting to really use it. And now us
Right.
operating the fourth densities, realizing it exists and like kind of playing with it. But 5D, it's like the full integration of both, you
Hmm.
know, and I think we're headed there. God knows when, but we'll definitely
It'll
see.
happen. I mean, like
Yeah,
we're definitely on the ascent.
yeah,
Like in like Steiner talks a lot about this a lot, but
yeah.
we're essentially on the ascent, and that's why I think it's been my experience at least that a lot more people have been becoming aware of these energies and of the astral body and things like that. And so that to me is a telltale sign that, something's happening. And, the ultimate purpose, I guess, well, one of the purposes behind it is that, as we were coming down in density from like times of Lemuria and times of Atlantis, we were kind of just like getting the hang of things. We didn't kind of know what to expect. And you see that kind of reflected through like the fall of Lemuria and the fall of Atlantis, right? But now we are cognizant, or we're tapping into the knowledge of what happened in those times. And it's like we're going through this integration process to where we've experienced all of them. And now it's time to mash everything together And I mean, there's no other way but up. And we have to go through that. We have to be able to tap not only into our physicality, but also into the extra senses that we have, our etheric and astral bodies and beyond, in order to like fully be able to grow spiritually.
Yeah,
Go into avatar mode.
Right? Yeah.
and it's interesting how like our whole conversation just made a loop. Well, I think I made a post about this once, how like we're not ascending out of our body, right, into like the ethers, but we're descending into it, and that's what's us learning the body, right, and learning,
Right.
understanding all the different symptoms and whatnot. But how do we do that? It's through decoding and healing, right? It's like through the maze, we're coming back in and like recognizing the past lives, the traumas of our ancestors, and like how it affected us. And they're like, it's that part is the game part. It's like figuring out how to descend back in so that we can have that fullest expression of human self. And like sometimes it took, because it's taking us, like you've mentioned Atlantis and whatnot, I think it's taking us generations, but like we're that peak where it's accumulating and we're feeling so much is happening because we're trying to do the work of like so much, and it's just so fascinating.
I mean, not only that, but there's also like all sorts of things happening spiritually, like in the spiritual world, that are trying to keep us from not achieving that.
Yeah,
but
I can definitely go into that.
I can definitely go into that. But before,
Yeah,
I want to touch upon what you were asking about earlier about how just common people can, or everybody can tap into it without the need of having some sort of like external thing, like, or person or whatever. And what I remember is like being able to tap into the heart space is probably the easiest way of doing it. You hear it cued a lot in classes, especially the classes that we take, but it does all the difference. If you want to,
it's
you want
simple
to,
and true. It's
right?
simple
Yeah.
and it works.
That.
And I think every single time that I've been able to tap into that unity consciousness that I spoke of, it has been through that. I mean, I'm not doing it. I mean, now I am, but in the past I wasn't. I wasn't cognizant of it. But that's usually where those messages come in from, and also like, you could be facing something that might be like pretty deep, and you might not have all the answers for. And you can just like, usually at times like that, if like in the past where I've been trying to seek a solution or something, and I had no idea what a particular cause came from, whatever, I always count it, just post the question. And I just post it to, like, you can think of posting the question to the universe or God, source, whatever. But I always post a question, and the answer always comes. Like, without a doubt, the answer always comes. And it's usually when I'm doing something really mundane, like, cleaning my apartment or washing the dishes or whatever, taking a walk, that all of a sudden I get this download, and it makes so much sense. Like, and those are like simple ways that people can tap into these things, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's different for everyone, right? Like
Right.
kind of watching yourself how you respond, or like watching yourself how the messages come to you is really, really important, because everyone's so unique, and everyone's perception and sensory abilities, even supernatural abilities, are different. Some people get it visually when they meditate. Some people get it visually when they're drawing. Some people when they're running and moving or dancing or sitting in a train, and some people when they're writing and whatnot. So like I think choosing a form of art, some sort of self-expression, really, really helps to kind of pose the question ahead of time, get tuned in, get focused, and just start doing something. And it can show up as whatever, but eventually the chaos starts organizing itself It turns
Mm-hmm.
into a specific kind of message or a symbol that your subconscious and your conscious mind is able to integrate. And that's how you actually open up those codes, right? Like we receive codes all the time from the sun and the solar flares and the earth
Right.
and the
Yeah.
plants and the trees. Everything is constantly messaging us. But to be able to really integrate it into the conscious mind, so we become aware and awake, like this is the awakening process of being aware, is to take these codes, take this energy ball intention, crack it open, and then, what does it mean? How can I integrate it? How can I apply it? How can I create art, create things that the world can relate to raise the energy frequency of the
Mm-hmm.
collective?
Yeah.
Right.
And
Being of
ask
service to
too,
others.
be like,
Mm-hmm.
I want a sign in the next 2 days. Like, please send me a sign, right? That's what
Yeah.
the question is. Or like, it was funny. I was doing a session with this woman, and she was like, I wanted to hear this particular word in the next 2 days, and it's like completely uncommon word. And then she ends up like hearing it the day after, and she's like, all right, like this is the sign that I need to follow this, you know?
It's trippy.
And
Yeah.
yeah, that's the perfect way.
Yeah, remember those times in the beginning where we're like, oh my God, there was a coincidence. Oh my God, there's a
Mm-hmm.
synchronicity. Now it's
Oh
like,
my God. Yeah.
but synchronicities are not
No.
showing up as much. What's happening? Before we used to get so excited, and now it's like, okay, they're not coming in as much. Maybe we're not aligned as much anymore. Where do I
They become more
go?
cryptic in the form of
Yeah,
like angel numbers, and then you gotta like decode the meaning behind it, right?
exactly. One thing I wanted to mention about what you said earlier, Lou, about how we're all like, can tap into the previous mistakes that we did during
Mm.
Lemurian and Atlantean
Yeah.
times.
Mhm.
Um, I'm starting to get a very strong feeling that the things that have happened around that time are about to repeat themselves.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. I'm so glad that you brought that up.
And it's like one thing of us being like, okay, we're as light workers on this ascension path and we're activating and figuring things out and we're going at a pace that's kind of used to us in peace times almost, like, okay, there's darkness and density, there's all this stuff happening, but still we're living in a very stable times.
Right.
Or we used to live in very stable times, but since that crazy alignment in 2019 November, and since then
Mhm.
2020, and now it just keeps accelerating and getting stronger.
Yeah.
I feel like there's this intense pressure that is coming from the inside and from the outside for us to really tap into avatar status. Like we really have to activate to be able to take on what's
Yeah.
coming, because we fucked up in the past. We haven't proven ourselves to do better this time. I feel like this cataclysm is far bigger than what has come before, because it ripples through all time, space, and all these
Hmm.
dimensions in a way that makes a huge difference, because we have all these beings, all these extraterrestrial beings watching us right now going through this massive transformation. And if we don't level up our game and really get our shit together, like, the tsunami is coming, like the energy is coming, and we have to navigate and deal with it.
100%. I'm so glad that you brought that up because that's essentially what I've been looking into for the past 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And how that all weaves into some of the material that Steiner talks about, and especially the things that have transpired in the last 2 or 3 years. And so like and the stuff that I started to look at, it definitely talks about what ended up what ended up being the catalyst behind the fall of Atlantis. And I'm actually like at this moment making a video about it. So this is like a great timing, right? But essentially what ended up bringing the fall of Atlantis was the inability of a particular part of humanity from being unable to adapt to the cosmic impulse that was causing an evolutionary change in humanity at the time. And so from Lemuria to Atlantis, you can what ended up happening was that as we kept falling down in density, yes, we were tapped into the spiritual world. We were way more than we are now, right? But we lacked a particular sense of discernment. We lacked intellect, like our intellect one was not fully developed. And so this cosmic impulse was causing us to individuate, to grow a personality, and to change from being in this tribal mentality more into like the personal. And there were different forces at play that came into this. That's when you start seeing like Lucifer and Ahriman show up, and also the Christ consciousness. If we're talking solely from the anthroposophical viewpoint, which I mean, it talks about things in a Christian sense, but it's not that. So I don't want people to think of this incorrectly as speaking of the figures that you see talked about in the Bible or whatnot, which they're great archetypes and what, but these like religious texts are so watered down that they contain very little like spiritual wisdom, I find. So having said all that, you had a sect of people that eventually started to develop black magic, and that's what ended up causing this rift. Like we went from being, for the most part, almost in this utopian kind of society with like free energy and stuff like that, into a part of society that all of a sudden you had the emergence of the left-hand path brotherhoods and the right-hand path brotherhood. So brotherhoods of darkness and the brotherhoods of light. Also, if we go into Edgar Casey's work, he explains this like in like vast detail, right? And he talks about specifically what these groups were called. He calls the Brotherhood of Light the Amelius group, and the Brotherhood of Darkness the Belial group. And so this rift ended up causing all this conflict, and eventually, because of the technology that they had, the Amelius group was using this technology for spiritual means. So at that time, because Christ consciousness had not, or the Jesus Christ had not incarnated here and performed the rite that he performed through the crucifixion at Golgotha, to spiritually evolve, humanity at that time, at the time of Atlantis, needed external means. And those external means were this spiritual technology that existed, that was able to conjure spiritual beings. This is gonna get wild, from higher spiritual spheres to basically come down here on the earth and impart their teachings to us. That was one way. And the other way, through technology. And there was another one, through this like adept, like this whole like mentorship thing that existed through like the temple cultures and all of that. So it was passed down because like essentially you had the master that you were studying under, and he was at a different frequency. You had to come into, like, you had to learn how to be at that frequency, and the only way that you could achieve that was to be around him. And by being around him and or her, and it was usually, I think at this time we had transitioned more into like a patriarchal society, and the women were still being used because of their intuitive sense spiritually, and in that way, like, the men were able to tap into the ancient mysteries that way. But for the most part, you start to see that shift of because of the power dynamics emerging, of being more led by men. But so you had that, those priest figures could not adapt to it, and so they had to rely on technology in order to hold their status, because society, everything was changing because of this impulse, right? they did not want to lose power, and so they became power hungry, and they started using the spiritual technology against or using it as weapons, basically, and that's what caused several cataclysms, and which eventually led to the flood that all these ancient cultures talk about, right? And this like deep psychological wound that occurred in the collective that almost caused us to have amnesia, or at least to not want to look at that aspect of ourselves, in order to collectively do the inner work and heal things. And that's, because of the cyclical nature of time, we're seeing the emergence of these conflicts in basically the same way that occurred back then, because the figures that were present back then are still present right now. And if, like me, anybody that's watching has gone down the rabbit hole and asked themselves, like, how could it be that things have gotten so dark and the people manipulating world events are so evil? Like, it boggles my mind to believe that a human being can be this evil. And to me, what ends up explaining things is that we're not dealing with humans. We're not even dealing with like this extraterrestrial, like reptilian forces that a lot of people think are leading things, but we're actually dealing with these cosmic impulses that are evil in nature, but by their nature, they're also in us. And anthroposophy explains that as Lucifer and Ahriman, or the Luciferic and the Ahrimanic impulses. And so to kind of like tie back into the work that all of us are doing in this space to bring in more light and in healing to the collective, that's essentially what we're dealing with. We have to redeem those darker parts of ourselves that you can think of them as the mechanism behind our traumas and things like that, because the spiritual world is so enmeshed. Like, people have no idea how enmeshed it is with us, to the point, I mean, through Steiner's point, that he talks about Lucifer and Ahriman also being in us. And so we can redeem evil that way. We can heal ourselves. By healing ourselves, we're basically shedding light, if you will, on all these things, and eventually stopping evil in its tracks. But yeah, like everything that we're seeing nowadays, like all the transhumanism, the modification, the DNA modification, and even worse, like before, it was kind of like just kind of luciferic in a way that the things that we were doing to each other, for instance, like through war, for instance, that's like basically descending into these beast-like behaviors, beast-like forms. That's all like the luciferic energies, versus now everything that's kind of like tied to science, without science that completely dismisses the spirit, things that are dealing with modifying our own biology to supposedly become superhuman, but all that we're doing is becoming a mockery, an inversion of our true spiritual selves. All of that is basically like the same things that were happening in Atlantis. There was an astounding level of genetic modification happening, and that's why you see depictions of like chimeras and sphinxes and stuff like that from like the Sumerian, Assyrian cultures, Egyptian cultures. Like, these were actual things that were being created. Like, I don't know, like even some of the technology now that we have, like with AIs and things like that, that existed since Lemurian times. Even like these like Luciferic and Ahrimanic impulses are not new, they're ancient. And so we're dealing with something that's thousands of years old, that has been in the background trying to impair our own growth. But at the same time, I would say that evil is a necessary evil. Like, without it, we would not be able to ascend. We will not be able to grow spiritually, and we will not be able to remember who we really are without having that impulse basically like poking at us and showing us the inverse of what we truly are. So
it goes back to being a game, right? And orchestrated in like the black hole.
exactly.
But also going to like where we started this conversation on about like the flood or like an impulse of something happening. But it just seems like, I mean, our Earth is like a living organism. It's like us. So it's like when we have like an emotional outburst or like a symptom going on, it's because of something happening internally or emotions bottling up. So it's almost like the system is like the emotion, and then the Earth is like wants to react to whatever it is that's coming because it doesn't want to hold that anymore, right?
Exactly. We are Steiner has a really good way of describing it. I'm probably gonna butcher it, but he says that, you know, the way that humanity came to be, not only is it, like it came to be through a cosmic impulse. And in order for that cosmic impulse to even occur, it needed the earth. So we are a direct cosmic impulse of the earth. We are the earth as well. And so like, I mean, it just kind of goes to, it follows like the seven hermetic principles, right? As above, so below. Like we're all like representations of even like things that are bigger than ourselves. We also have like, we also represent all the seven spheres that anthroposophy talks about, for instance. Like we are like the universe, like literally, because we're in mesh with it, and separation is not a thing. Like it's just an illusion here, but it's a necessary thing for us to grow. So
Yeah, I'm coming from a Taoist perspective. And you know, in Taoism you have like the unity of yin yang, all that is the universe, creation, creative intelligence, God, whatever we may call it. And then out of one there's two, you know, and two is the opposite. So we have the light and the dark, and there's
right.
no how's it called? No valuing for the light and the dark, you know. There's no way for us to experience anything as humans or as just simple energy if there was no other to reflect on,
Right.
you know. So it's one thing to be like, okay, there's evil forces out there and there's Lucifer and there's all these kind of experiences and that we are facing in our lives, but it's another thing to be like, I cannot grow, the universe cannot inhale and exhale to expand itself without it. So I think coming from a very neutral point of view where you figure out how
Yeah.
to balance or like find that snake between the yin and yang to be able to come to the state of unity, of reconciling it within ourselves as well as our surrounding, it's very hard for us not to jump into one side or the other because there's always a pendulum experience, right?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think that also ties to how we started this entire conversation about how I approach like just being comfortable, like, well, comfortable for lack of a better word, but being able to navigate like some of the darker times, for instance, or look at even darker stuff in the collective without trying to get too phased by it and not trying to judge it, right? Just recognizing that it's there, it's serving a purpose, and having the awareness that it's there. Now I can go forth and kind of like attempt to transmute that, if that's in the highest good for all, right?
Exactly. Yeah, once you come from like a more neutral, non-judgmental kind of perspective, it's way easier for us to kind of emotionally almost detach from it to be able to make more logical decisions, but always
Exactly.
being able to come from the wisdom of the heart. And I think that's when we start making progress into the integration. But you know, it's easier said than
I
done, you
know.
know. There's like a whole thing of like philosophizing and talking about things, but when, you know, the reptilian shows up and it's like, wow.
Yeah, when
I'm
you're in
about
the
to
thick of
kidnap
it,
you.
it's
It's
not
like, okay.
fun. Yeah, it takes a lot. It takes an immense amount of practice. Like I hope that we're not given the impression that, you know, you can just willy-nilly walk into it and deal with whatever dark times you're dealing with. It's definitely not like that. And it's taken me years, like literally years, in order to, be in that space of where I can I can definitely notice when I'm going there, and I mean, I won't say that I would fully stop, like, whatever thing that I'm experiencing to come through. Like it has to come through, because otherwise, that emotion is gonna be, blocked in the body somewhere, right? So I have to let it go through, but also like I'm able to draw the awareness of, okay, like this is a mirror, and let's try to look at it from a higher perspective, and let's see what the teaching is, and not be consumed by it, and let it, like keep repeating itself, basically.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all part of the work. But just to go back just a little bit
Yeah.
onto like how these cataclysmic times are showing up for us right
Mm-hmm.
now. Like I was thinking that the most people, even like during Nazi times, like when the Nazi regime
Yeah.
took hold, and the general population was sitting at home living their lives, a lot of people had no idea what was happening. They
Yeah.
had no clue that there were concentration camps, and they had no clue about the deportations. They had no clue about the gassing, all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're also again in a place where us as normal people sitting at home and having everything that we need to survive and um, keep the everyday life, keep the system going. But in the background, there are so many things that are happening. We just hear in the news there's
Yeah.
genetic modifications going on. There's some people in the lab, they're playing
Mm-hmm.
with those syringes. But in reality, there's so much more happening. And I think if we are not aware and keep an eye on the pulse of things might just suddenly happen to us where we're completely dumbfounded. And I want that not to happen. I don't want to be
No.
think
part of it.
that's the importance of learning how to be more self-sufficient and not relying on the government as much. And that's why we're seeing everyone just in the conscious community space are like, all right, and not even in the conscious community, just people who are more aware of like where
Yeah.
the world was leading. Like they're like, okay, like how can I be okay surviving on my own without the need of, the government supplying me things. And that's where it gets real, because it starts hitting our three-dimensional reality of like, okay, safety and supply and like what comes in.
Yeah.
And we know, like, it's like, you're right, Moon. It's like we can philosophize about things all we want, but when it comes down to like, all right, but what are we actually, like, what steps here right now are we actually doing in order to be more self-sufficient? Like, do we, you know what I mean? And like, do we have a supply of things if like a catalysm
Mm-hmm.
happened, or if war broke out? And at the end of the day, and this is not to fear monger whatsoever, like it's
Right.
just about practicality. It's like we have to learn how to bridge that like three-dimensional reality and the astral body, because we're so aware, we send messages all the time about things.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it comes to action too.
Yeah. And I think to tie it back to just all the spiritual stuff that we were talking about, it's the practice of spirituality, right? Because at the end of the day, like, you could be of service to somebody. We could be of service to each other. We don't like necessarily have to be healers or anything like that, but like by forming communities and by saying, hey, like, this stuff doesn't make sense, and we can educate other people as to why it doesn't make sense and better ways of doing it without having to rely on basically the mafia, which is basically what government ends up, like, if you boil it down to it, that's what it is. Like, it's that I think right now it's just that lack of awareness that is keeping the power structure in place. There's definitely cracks, and I would say that these people are definitely not as powerful as they would like us to perceive them to be. Like, we outnumber them, and so I'm optimistic that by keeping like sharing, making people aware of alternatives, of things like how to grow their own food, how to grow communities, how to create our own currency so that we can trade with each other. That's actually that's happened, and I think that happened in the Netherlands or something. There's something going on over there with the farmers. Basically, like the government, which is backed by the World Economic Forum, is saying that the farmers have to give up like something ridiculous, like 70-80% of their land for climate change or something like that. And like the farmers were like, you're basically robbing us of our living, like our way of life, and also like the people that we're serving. And so people have been like working on their own alternatives out there, and for to some extent it has been working. Like they've been creating communities and just trading with each other, just food. And so like that's essentially what we need to do. Like at the end of the day, like we're the ones in power. Like they're supposed to represent us. We're the ones that are calling the shots. This is not supposed to be like back in medieval times when we had monarchies, and it was the monarchy that was believed to be like divinely chosen and can down all these decrees on the peasants and tell us how to live. Like no, like we're the ones in control of our own fate, and we can decide, hey, like this system is broken, let's fix it. And the mafia can come in and work with us, or they can just bust off. So
And I think it that's and in the power of the community, well,
yeah,
it's part of the ascension process, because we now realizing that we're one, that we're interconnected. Because it and when 2020 happened and they sent everybody home, they disconnected everyone from their community. Now everyone's behind the screen, completely separated by walls,
right.
and we're not seeing each other as much. And that makes, and a lot of people that I've been speaking to, that actually made them more depressed and like going to the office
No,
was,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
because well, it has its ups and downs, but at the same time, like you're no longer parts of things. And so people are starting to realize that over the past 2 years, but in the conscious way, creating community and being interrelated depending on different things with each other creates us to be a one interconnected system, reminding us that we all come from one, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's kind of like a replay of, this descension and ascension process I was describing, where as we were like before, we were a tribal consciousness, and then we started to split off, and now we're back into this ascension timeline, and it's time to integrate both. So yeah, I think community is the way, and it's the only I mean, there's no other way around it. Bringing that awareness of each other, and also spiritually of each other, is what's gonna get us out of this mess.
Mm-hmm.
I really love how it is one beautiful circle from like starting to heal into like the accumulation
Right.
we have in the
The
world.
collective, yeah.
It's great.
And then coming together in community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just one last thing that I wanted to mention, and it's been kind of itching me a little bit, is the fact like, okay, it's one thing to say we need to come in community, and we do, and this is definitely for sure, no matter what the solution, like for sure, this is the core. But there's a lot of fluffiness in
Mm-hmm.
all this, right? And the truth is, Atlantis or great civilizations have fallen because of the
Mm-hmm.
misuse of technology, because of the misuse of black magic, because of the misuse of gene editing, not gene editing, like called cloning,
Yeah.
and there's a misuse of nuclear power. Like there's like
Mm-hmm.
very specific things that have happened for this huge cataclysm to happen. And we are in our society at this point in time where those things are
Mm-hmm.
literally out there happening, and they're happening in a way that most normal people living their normal lives don't have access to, but
Mm.
it is slowly taking over our lives. It is taking over our lives by creating these artificial matrices, creating these dream worlds within the dream world that trap our
The eight
attention and life
sphere,
force
yeah.
energy and all these things, right? And there's, gene editing happening with you know what's been happening in
Yeah.
2020 and
Yeah. The
how they were
Hydras, the
protecting us.
nanobots. Yeah.
Exactly. And um, there's so many ways how there's subversive control happening that if we don't pay attention to the hard things, like the hard facts, and how do we protect ourselves? How do we protect ourselves from the internet? Yes, it is community and global and everybody is
Yeah.
reaching, but then also there's so much energy that is coming through the computer screens, from our TVs, from just going to the doctors and getting
Yeah.
immunization, whatever. There's so many ways that we are confronted with that. And without fear mongering any of this, we have to put information out there and create an alternative to these things that are hard. Not just the fluffy, I love you, I hug you, and we're all together
Right.
in this, and
Hmm.
let's do this. And the other end is like, okay, we need to get our shit together. We need to like, have, water filtration systems that actually work and choose the food correctly. From there to, having firewalls and having communication systems that are not dependent, energy systems that are not dependent, so many things. There's so much to do in a very short amount of time. All these fringe people that have been kind of talking left and right as we were
Hmm.
growing up, to where are we now, coming to this, oh my God, 2020 happened.
Hmm.
Okay, all the things that we imagined that would happen after 2020 are starting to come into place slowly. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, how are we going to deal with this?
Yeah. And this is a
That,
power cube. Everyone's different at something different. And so like, but it's like bringing all these people together to merge it. And there are places like that already doing it. I mean, there's beautiful communities being built here and there. But I think it's just like, it's bringing out our own individual strength, and kind of like what Lou was saying at the beginning, where
mhm.
he's like, I felt different, but I embrace my different. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's learning to embrace your different and bringing out what you're good at, because we're all individual like imprints, but it's hard sometimes because we have to deconstruct what society's taught us to be like, sit in a classroom, no, you're wrong, there's only A, B, or C, one answer is right, like do
Hmm.
this, do that, like forget your dreams, just become whatever the 5 things that
Yeah.
are told kids to be. It's
Right.
wiring ourselves to find our individual self, but then there's already people who like done the work and they're going at it, and they're bringing their gifts to the world, and like so much love to those people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just do real
Yeah.
quick? In our previous regression, Cornelia, when you put me under, um, do you remember this whole thing about this avatar activation thing?
Yours, right?
Yeah, it was really interesting because Cornelia put me under in the last lunar eclipse just a couple of days ago, and
Oh,
those are
wow.
just the
Hmm.
thoughts that are like, swirling around. We always like to use those portal days and
Yeah.
portal experiences to like, dive deep and get information. And
Same.
that's great. Yeah, I think we should for sure share all the things that
Hmm.
we're collecting. Um, but one thing was about how malleable time is, right? We are here in this linear timeline in 3D, but as we're becoming multidimensional, we're able to tap into different timelines and time currents almost.
Hmm.
And I was told in that regression that possible for us to go back in time where all these different teachers and teachings would somehow pop up as symbology or as people or as conversations would pop up in our lives, but we were not able to unlock these codes and activations back then
Mm.
at the time, just because our minds were not ready.
Mhm.
But part of becoming our avatar selves, or stepping into our supernatural abilities to deal with the supernatural stuff that is starting to happen in the 3D, it is possible for us to go back in time through our meditations, through our hypnosis and whatnot, and then unlock and crack these codes open to be able to integrate, which means it's unlocking bits and pieces of ourselves and our psychic abilities to be able to be used in the now. It's almost like the Matrix, like the movie Matrix. So the recommendation really was to figure out ways how to get into theta state throughout the day multiple
Mm.
times. So like, if not 3 times in the morning, during the day, and in the evening, to keep
Yeah.
checking in, to keep tapping in, to stay aware, stay focused on what's at hand, and jump into these previous timelines and previous occurrences to activate, because we have to become our fullest potential rather than live as potentialities. We have to come to a place where we function on a whole different level to even also take on bigger roles in the ascension process. We're not just little humans, one single person wanting around and looking for community, that too. But if we jump into this multidimensional space, we actually have a lot of power. And we can only do that when we step into a multi-dimensional supernatural space.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. I think, yeah, to your point, like this past eclipse, I think for me, the message was basically like very strongly about transformation and basically saying, hey, like playtime's over. Like now things are getting serious, and
Yeah.
like you can't be the way that you were even 6 months ago. Like now it's time to like really get serious with things. And so yeah,
No,
I
And the
mean,
solar eclipse was almost about, sorry.
Go ahead and I'll go.
The solar eclipse was almost like mainly about facing our fears, like looking at the things that were holding us back and
yeah,
all the things how we were avoiding and resisting what's coming. And during the eclipse season, we were able to like figure out ways how to turn around and look at the fears. And then the lunar eclipse just now was like, okay, playtime is over. You're activated now. Now let's go.
And that's like because I put Moon under on the solar or on the eclipse, and then she put me under the day after. And like I was channeling like exactly what you guys are talking about is like that this eclipse, it set us forward, it like pushed us over the edge where now we have no more excuses. Like we're activated, like what we have is already there. And interesting, like I actually pulled this card. Yeah, it's like what is already with you, like basically that in this I pulled this car I think last night. It's like we already have everything we need, now it's just time to go and like show up, no more excuses, no more anything, like whatever our mission is, like we're here. And it's kind of beautiful, but it's also like it's overwhelming a little bit. You're like, all right.
yeah. I mean, it's funny how like we've all basically got the same message. I didn't put myself under hypnosis, but I would say that this was probably like the worst eclipse season that I faced. But I was already like so tired of like dealing with this thing. And I was like, okay, like let's sit down and finally like let's go through and face like my ultimate fear. Like let's go in and kind of like visualize what that would be like and sit with it for a long time. And I literally like took the day off of work to just do that. And once the eclipse came around, I was like I actually felt that energy of transformation go through. Um, and also started receiving these messages like both of y'all were relaying just now, that yeah, it's like it's go time.
Yeah, you went away for a second. It's true because I remember like summertime, you, Lou, and Moon, and myself. Like, I remember myself, I was going through like, I don't want to show up. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just felt so lost, you know? And then, like, I know Moon was
Yeah.
having trouble showing up on the internet. And then, like, Lou, too, you were completely off Instagram. And the second I
Yeah.
saw, like, he was gone. Like, he was gone for months. Like, from going from like posting like memes all the time to being like he's just MIA. And then the second I saw you pop up, it was funny because that was around the same time that I was having my breakthrough with Moon, that we were going to start doing a Blueray collective. And so we were like collectively going through this. I'm sure a lot of people are going through the same thing, you know, but it was interesting to see the people in my life and how they're moving.
Yeah.
So we're,
It's really interesting because also at that same time, like I was going through like a very like transformative period for like for the better, where it was like an immense amount of energy, and that's why I came back. I was like, okay, it's finally time to come back.
yeah, that's awesome.
Amazing. Hey, so um, Lou, welcome to the Blueray Collective.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It is
Welcome.
such a pleasure
Yeah.
meeting you. I heard so much about you all this time from Cornelia, and how you're super tuned in with all the things that we're about, and all the references that you bought. Like I brought, like it lit me up. I'm a huge fan of Rudolf Steiner and
Cool.
Uspensky and Gurdjieff and all these people. So I love how we're all vibing together, and we would love to have you back if you're interested.
Oh, 100%. Like I could keep talking for hours. Like
Exactly. Let's keep the conversation going. And, we're building the collective, we're building the network that we talked about. And
yeah.
it's such a pleasure to have you.
I mean, the pleasure's all mine. Like it's an honor to be here. Like I also heard a lot about you. I've been wanting to meet you for a long time. And yeah, like I mean, whatever y'all need, like I'm at y'all service. So just let me know.
Probably we want to create, like, through the collective, we have this vision of like including people and like having people come on our page to share their stories. That way it becomes this interweaving network of support system. Like we got each other, like you're not alone. And so I'm sure we'll have you, like, maybe we'll post one of your videos or whatnot.
Right.
So
Yeah, just make like collaborative posts together,
Yeah.
make more podcasts. And if there's any like special energies coming in as right now, like, oh my God, let's check in with Lou.
Hey,
He's
I'm
my
always down
go-to
to talk.
too.
Yeah.
So.
And I can talk for hours. Cornelia can tell you all about that. Like you can tell me to shut up because like I can just keep going.
No, please keep going. And we're just the same. And we're here, to broadcast and disseminate our knowledge and our experiences. And yeah, it was a real pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thank you to both of y'all.